Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Mental Health in the Time of Coronavirus Part 4, Meaning and Purpose. So this week we have some exciting stuff for you. The question for this week is, how is the city of Milwaukee related to Dante's vision of eternity in Paradiso? That is the question for us today. Also, stay tuned. This week we're going to be doing a giveaway. So for those of you who participated or those of you who would like to participate, please stay tuned. We will be doing a live drawing on the air for you who are involved. So please fill out your surveys that we ask you to, and we'll go from there. All right, so we're going to be doing a little bit of a review after the introduction. Who am I? My name is Dr. David Kieran. I'm the Medical Director of Acacia Mental Health, and I am the Chief Medical Officer at Flourish Tech. This is a live stream that covers a lot of important topics, but also some heavy topics. This week we are going to be talking about things like suicide and purpose and meaning in life, and so it's going to be a heavier presentation, so be warned. Chat. We've got one going. It's a live chat. Make sure that you are nice. Otherwise, we'll ask you to leave or make you leave. So there you go. Sponsoring organizations Flourish Tech and Acacia Mental Health. So we are continuing to be in the midst of the unprecedented coronavirus outbreak. 2.2 million cases, 156,000 people have died as of today. And it just continues to rise. It continues to increase. And so we continue to explore the significance of this for the present moment. How is it that we are living in this time? What are we to do? How are we to respond? Those are some of the questions I will address this week. Reviewing the past weeks, we have 3 domains as humans. There's a part of us that's a body, not dissimilar to a houseplant. There's another part that has a brain. We've got brains, and we got to care for those brains, at least the lower parts of them, in the same way that a dog or pet might need caring. And we also have a soul, and we'll talk more about that this week. From the body perspective, we need food and light. We also need social connection, community, movement, action, rest, sleep. And so in terms of, and then for our soul needs goodness and beauty and truth. We need meaningful work, transcendent experience, and knowledge. And here are our life hacks. Okay, so just as a review, life hack number 1 is don't eat crap. Now, we're in the midst of being sheltered in place, and it's very tempting to eat terribly. But don't do it. You'll feel much better if you don't eat crap. And it's hard to do, but as best you can, try to eat healthy. Use this as an opportunity to learn to cook or add a healthy snack into your diet or cut out something you know that's not good for you. Number 2, go outside every now and then. This is a big one, especially since we're cooped up in our houses or apartments. Make sure that you spend some time outside, ideally an hour or 2 a day, getting direct sunlight. This is helpful for regulating your circadian rhythm and a lot of other things. So go outside every now and then. Let the literal poison drain from your brain by sleeping. This is also a very important thing to do. Sleep every day. We need to do that, and if you sleep regularly at the same times, making sure that you don't have caffeine late, making sure that you don't use your bed for other stuff besides sleeping, making sure that you are focusing on some of these sleep hygiene routines can really help you feel better. Remember to spend time with people. Spend time with people that you care about. Spend time with people you don't care about. Social connections are severed and challenged during this time of coronavirus, so be sure to prioritize spending time with a social distance or, electronically through this crisis. And sometimes get off your butt. So exercise is also important. Being sure the other key here is the difference between 0 and a little bit is an enormous benefit. So even just a little bit of exercise can go a very long way. And last but not least, is tell the truth and don't believe dumb things about yourself. So we talked about all of the messages, the deceptive brain messages or cognitive distortions that we tell ourselves. And we talked about how this really affects our mood. The stories we tell about the coronavirus, the stories we tell about how we're going to respond to it, all affect how we feel. On the philosophical side, on the deeper considerations, we talked about the resilience of the people of London during the Blitz. We talked about how even in the midst of incredible challenges, humans are able to rise to the occasion and have these responses that are truly inspiring, and how we might be able to respond like they did in this present crisis. We talked about the importance of solitude and the importance of spending time reflecting on who we are and what we want to be, spending time alone with our thoughts. We talked about the importance of neuroplasticity, the ability for us to change our brains as we can change a lump of clay into a sculpture. That if you redirect your thoughts, if you move your attention, you're able to shape your brain into something that is truly good. Now, without further ado, that is for review. Now we're going to get into, we also talked about this. We also talked about the how there are factors that are out of our control, our genetics and upbringing, our past experiences, and those things lead to changes in our brain, and that's out of our control. And that leads to negative thoughts, which are out of our control, which leads to sadness, which is out of our control. But we also have all of these other thoughts that are within our control to shift our attention to, and that can lead to a different outcome in terms of how we feel. And now we're going to talk about the last part of this. We're going to be discussing the soul or psyche and the importance of focusing on goodness and beauty. We talked a bit about truth and believing true things about yourself, and now we're going to talk about some of these other domains that are important. This sort of arrangement of words, goodness, beauty, truth. This is called the transcendentals. This is an old idea that some of these deepest things are kind of the same thing, that they're in these different categories, but they're all kind of unified. That things that are true are also beautiful, are also good. Sometimes we can see that in the example of mathematics. So if you imagine a mathematical proof, or even in physics, when you see that all of the terms cancel out, and it just you see this 3 or 4 term equation, and it's just beautiful. And for those in the audience who haven't had that experience, you might have had an experience with music that, like, yeah, that note or that bar, that's perfect. That's exactly how it should be. And it's not exactly easy to get there beforehand, but these things all line up. The mathematics of, math, or of music, or of any of these other domains, you can imagine there being an alignment of goodness and beauty and truth. And so we're going to talk about that not so much in terms of aesthetic beauty, but in terms of a life. How do we live our lives in line with goodness and beauty and truth? And so we'll start with the beautiful. How do we live a beautiful life? And not so much on the outside, but how do we live our lives such that the story of our life is itself a beautiful story or a good story? Buddha says, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. Now, this is a profound statement. Now, we think about, I am my circumstances. I am my race. I am who my parents taught me to be. And those things are true enough. But from one very important perspective, those things are all illusions. The most important thing about who you are, or maybe the only thing about who you are, is your thoughts. And so how do we think about that? What does that mean? And this is a fascinating study. So this I'm going to set the setup here is, okay, so you had a bunch of people who were invited to come to a study. And the only term of the study, the only thing that they were doing, was measuring how uncomfortable people were in a room with nothing to do. So they took their phone away, and they had them sit in this room alone, silently. And then they have the option of either sitting there or delivering an electric shock to themselves. Now, the electric shock didn't do anything. They didn't get paid to do this. It changed no terms. They were given the shock beforehand, so they knew what it did and how painful it was. And in fact, all people rated that as a painful shock they would not otherwise want to receive. All right, so what did they do? What were the results of this study? The results of the study were that 25% of women and over half of men would shock themselves out of apparently pure boredom. That's astonishing. That is, dare I say it, shocking. Now, bad puns aside, this is really significant because if you think about it, why is it that the mental space, the psyche of a person is so unpleasant that the thought that, hey, maybe if I have an electric shock and I shock myself, that is more desirable than just sitting with my own thoughts? That's a fascinating idea, that our experience of pain might be greater with isolation and silence than it is with literal physical pain. And so how do we think about this? How do we think about the significance of this fact? And I think this gets to what kind of mental space. Is our mental space beautiful? And how much responsibility do we have for creating a desirable stream of thoughts? Now, one existential psychotherapist, a guy who he's one of those guys, I love these guys, who wrote the book on existential psychotherapy. And by wrote the book, I mean literally there was a book titled Existential Psychotherapy, and there's really only one of them, and he wrote it. So, in any case, Irv Yalom, professor at Stanford, he says this: until one realizes that one has created one's own dysphoria, there can be no motivation to change. Now, for Yalom, he goes to the extreme in terms of how much responsibility a human has for their present state, of mind. Now, I don't think you have to go all the way to go part of the way, and that's plenty far, which is to say, there's plenty of things that we are doing in the choices we make of what to think about, what to put our attention on, how to live, that create intense dysphoria, intense misery, intense pain, frequent pain. And what are things that we can do to change that thought stream, to change our mental space from something that isn't beautiful into something that is, into a place that we might actually want to live in? Now, another set of philosophers called the Eagles also said something. We are all just prisoners here of our own device. Now, I like this line from Hotel California because it really speaks to that same idea that, yeah, there is this sense in which we're prisoners. We're other circumstances or addiction or whatever it is has got us here. But part of it's our fault. At least with a lot of the things, and I think certainly with a lot of the things that are less than something that'll bring you to a psychiatrist. A lot of those things can be our own fault or our own responsibility or our own device. And so how do we reverse that? How do we change those things? How do we escape from the prison that we've constructed? Now, part of the answer is reflecting on what the capacities we have as humans. Now, one of the most interesting things to me is vision. And for vision, generally we think about it as reflected photons, or at least scientifically. We're able to see because the sun sends out light, that light bounces off of plants and trees and rocks and buildings and people, and then it reflects into our eye, and then our eye is able to, in combination with our brain, make sense of what we're seeing and give us vision. What about for beauty? With beauty, there seems to be a similar perception. We're able to look at something and say, yes, that is beautiful, and that is not. Yet, with beauty, we often say, oh, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But we don't say that with vision. We say that vision is more or less real, and yeah, the eyeball's involved, but we're actually seeing a scene. We're experiencing the world visually. And so when we think about beauty, though, it raises this question. What exactly is the source of beauty? Where does it come from? How do we see it? How do we perceive it? But it seems like almost as a direct experience, we know that it exists, and we know it when we see it. And so when we look at our own life, when we sit silently in a room, do we like what we see? Which brings me to the state of Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee. This is a study on trees. Now, trees are amazing. I love trees. And what this study aimed to do was look at how did tree cover, canopy cover, affect mood. And I loved the approach. They basically took a bunch of satellite data that was able to measure how much tree cover there was in a particular place. And then they looked at the mood or the anxiety and depression states of people in those regions. And what they found was the more tree cover you had in a particular spot, the better people felt. And this is a surprising result. One wouldn't expect that trees necessarily to be so good or so impactful. What about all of the childhood experiences? What about the genetics? What about all of these other factors that might be affecting depression and anxiety? Those things were still present, but trees were also present, and they were also significant. And so it's important to reflect on, well, why? Well, I think one answer is beauty. The experience of looking at a tree, of being in a nature scene, in a natural setting, is enjoyable for humans. That there's something about it that we can't quite put into words that is good. Another study sent people on a walk, a 15-minute walk, a brief jaunt through nature. And they found that anxiety and anger and fatigue and confusion all dropped, whereas energy and vitality increased, and depression looked like it also, sadness also decreased, but not to a statistically significant degree, compared to between the city walkers and the park walkers. Again, this is a surprising result. Again, a brief 15-minute walk. We're not talking about like moving out to the woods or living in a rural setting. We're talking about just simply taking a walk outside where there's trees. And this gets to this idea of beauty doesn't have to be, a beautiful life doesn't have to be simply a grand narrative. It can be the story of my life 15 minutes from now was better than it was otherwise because I went for a walk outside. And I chose the path with trees rather than the path with concrete. And not everybody has even access to trees. So great. Try to figure it out. Maybe once a week would be great if you could once the shelter in place is lifted, figure out a way to incorporate, in this case, natural beauty. But likely a similar thing would happen with man-made beauty, with art or music. And so incorporating these things on one level is part of this. But it also gets deeper. And I'm going to take a turn to a very dark place, and a very dark time in human history, the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, one of the most important stories of the 20th century developed. It was based on the observations of a guy named Viktor Frankl. And he was a Jewish psychiatrist who was a prisoner in a lot of these work camps. And throughout the course of his time there, he realized something really profound. That the people who had a meaning or a purpose survived, and sometimes, in some cases, were even able to thrive in the midst of one of the most terrible human atrocities that we've ever witnessed or ever recorded. How is it possible? How is it possible for a person to do that? And he says that because this deep part of the human soul is satisfied, it can override so many other things. He quotes Nietzsche approvingly. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And this is a remarkable fact, that people are able to thrive in the midst of even the most difficult of circumstances. And our current circumstances are very difficult as well. But I think Frankl's example, his coming up with this psychological theory and being able to identify it in the midst of horror was something that was able to be produced in spite of the incredible challenge and the incredible horror. And so too with us. We can create a beautiful life. I love the cover of this particular printing of Man's Search for Meaning. The little the splash of color in the black and white. And how do we create something beautiful like that in the midst of a global pandemic? Turns out this is also good for your health. This is a study of relative risk of death and purpose of life. For those people who had the high sense of purpose in life, if you asked them and they said, yes, what I'm doing is meaningful or purposeful, and you compared them to people who said, no, what I'm doing is not purposeful, there's, even after adjusting for many of the things we know to be risk factors, there is a substantial decrease in the probability that a person's going to die, about a 17% drop in their mortality. And you think about, well, I could stop smoking, I could eat better, I could exercise. Yeah, those things definitely improve your health and extend your lifespan. But it seems so too does having a purpose. Humans don't do well when we lack a purpose. And so, what is a purpose you could have now, even while on lockdown? For some people, it's just going to work. I think that's a huge purpose. We are grateful for all of the essential workers, the people who drive trucks, the people who work in grocery stores, healthcare workers, etc. It's an incredibly important time, and we're able to see and appreciate the contributions. Maybe it's helping out, going shopping for a neighbor. Maybe it's using your engineering skills and figuring out how to 3D print a personal protective equipment. Or maybe it's just donating money. Maybe you haven't been as hard hit as others. Or maybe you have been, and yet you're still wanting to give more and donate. So there are a lot of ways that we can think back and imagine. When we tell the story to our kids, or when we recall it, will we be proud of the story we told of our own life? How did we create beauty in the midst of this chaos? Life hack. Do stuff that actually matters to you, at least sometimes. And I think, excuse me, I think this is easier said than done, but it's also something we can detect. Is what I'm doing today meaningful or not? And if not, is there something I could do even for an hour a week or 2 hours a week or more maybe that is meaningful? And am I creating a life that is a good story, that's beautiful, that's something I'd be proud of, that's something my kids would be proud of, that my community would be proud of? All right, moving on to the good. Now let me tell you a story of a person, and we talk about meaning and significance. And I'll tell you that this person's influence was profound. He changed millions, perhaps billions of lives. He changed the course of world history. He was eloquent and he was inspiring. And really, he was a person whose life no one could doubt had significance. His name? Adolf Hitler. Had a very, if you asked him, I'm sure, would have said, my life is full of purpose. But the question is that the kind of purpose that we're talking about? Is that what the kind of life that we would like to lead? And I think the answer for most of us is no. In fact, this is the exact opposite of what we want. We don't just want purpose, we want goodness. And Hitler did not have goodness. Now, we might contrast Hitler with somebody who had many of those same traits. That description I gave, inspired many people, was a great speaker, changed the course of history. All of those things are also true of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, the difference between these two people is one is a monster and the other is an exemplar, somebody that we would want to be like. And the difference between them is, among other things, that one of them was good. one of them had this sense of moral goodness and moral uprightness that we want to emulate. Now, I'm going to start to contrast a few stories, and this is and it's not just, and that's an extreme example, but there's a lot more subtle examples that are also critically important. This is the New Colossus, which is a poem about the Statue of Liberty, and I think more broadly, the American dream. It goes, "Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp," she cries, with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And this is an inspiring story of the American dream. And a big part of the American dream is that golden door. Yes, it is freedom, but it's also freedom to pursue happiness, and in that sense, material security and safety. And America has, in many ways, been that promise, had been that place that people hoped they would be able to find that security that they lacked elsewhere. This is a famous painting on the left, "Freedom from Fear." And the painting shows, two kids being tucked in by a mother and father. The newspaper talks about terror outside, but these two were able to sleep securely. And that is a big part of the American dream. And so we have this story of, and I think that a lot of us are seeking that security, that financial security. And, but this is sometimes, in some ways, in contrast to something else. This is also from the Western canon. This is something that Jesus says. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." In this passage, Jesus encourages risk-taking, and not just risk-taking, sacrifice. The painting on the right is of the Good Samaritan, a person who risked life, limb, and fortune for the sake of an unknown stranger. And so, in this present crisis, there is the opportunity to continue to pursue security and safety for our own. And there's the opportunity to sacrifice, perhaps in extreme ways, for others that might not be our own. And these are two stories, both of them present in the American psyche, both of them present in our sort of options that we can choose from and how to respond. But also it's not clear. These are both very compelling things. Nobody says that helping strangers is bad. Nobody says that helping your family is bad. But the question is, their intention right now. You've only got so much money. You've only got so much time. Where do you spend it? What story do you want to tell in the midst of this crisis? Here's another contrast. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. These are the immortal words of John Lennon from Imagine. This is a set of lyrics that are haunting and powerful and memorable. And in the song, Lennon describes this peace and brotherhood. And that with this vision of the sky above us as not having anything divine or supernatural about it, it's a vision that promises unity and connection. In contrast, something else that's part of the Western canon is Dante. This vision of after Dante goes through all of the circles of hell and the levels of purgatory, he makes it to paradise, and he continues to explore paradise until this moment when he sees this final vision. And in this final vision, his words fail him, and he describes this. "But here, powers failed my high imagination. But now my desire and will were turned, were like a balanced wheel, rotated evenly, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars." So Dante, at the end of his journey, sees that at the very bottom of the universe, or at the very end, or the very center, or all around and omnipresent, is God. And God's ultimate nature is love. And so, how do we make sense of these two stories? Is it the case that we're in the midst of a pandemic that, in the end, has no God behind it? Or, in the end, part of a story that turns out, through means that we can't understand, to be written or authored by a God of love? Or something else? This is a complex question. What is the story that we're in? What is the story we're telling? How are we explaining what's happening to us? One is the words of a medieval Catholic. The other is a singer and songwriter. So how do we... And both of these are powerful perspectives to making sense of what's going on in the world. To turn darker yet again, Camus says there's only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. And what he means is humans, unlike, well, this is my explanation. Humans, unlike dogs or bees, seem to have this perception of the universe. It never occurs to my adorable dog Sam that perhaps life is nothing but sound and fury. He seems quite content, or not, with his life, but never contemplates suicide, as far as we could tell. Bees sometimes are argued to sacrifice themselves for others, but it seems like that's not exactly the same phenomenon as somebody choosing to end their life because it's meaningless. It seems that humans have this unique capacity to perceive and see that there is meaning or beauty or goodness or truth in the universe, and to experience its lack as something painful. And so, what does that say about our condition? What does that say about this present crisis? It says that it brings us to this particular study, which is yet again astonishing. So there's a lot of factors that affect suicide. A lot of things that we can do or be or have as risk factors, but it seems that religious service attendance is incredibly connected to reduced rates of completing suicide. This was one of the, this is an incredible study, incredibly well done study about, with the Nurses' Health Study, and it shows that many of the factors that we would have used to explain other explanations for suicide aren't applicable. That it seems that it's this particular variable, religious service attendance, that predicts who's going to complete suicide in the follow-up. But why? One reason might be that in church or at religious services, we're asking these questions, and people who attend are exploring, what is my part in this grand story? Is there a grand story? How do I make sense of these things? Does my life matter? And I think that that's a critical question. And if you look at outside of church and religious service attendance, look at another study on activity. This is a study of Canadian youth. And they looked at the activity that was most important to a young person, and then looked at the odds of their change in suicide risk, or whether or not that predicted whether or not they'd be in a high-risk suicide group. And it turned out that for many of these activities, whether it be something, quote-unquote pro-social, like volunteering or employment or education or even or sports, all of these things seemed to reduce the chance that a person was going to be in that high risk. Whereas things like hobbies or media use that are fun and enjoyable don't seem to connect to this satisfying, this ultimate concern. But the other interesting thing is that engaging in these meaningful activities in this particular study was connected to increased self-esteem increased social connection, decreased health-related concerns, and decreased depressive symptoms. In other words, yes, these activities were important, but the way they were working at reducing the risk was by these different factors. That people who volunteered felt higher self-esteem. People who went to sporting events had a better social connection, and so on. And so it seems that there are a variety of ways that people can have these experiences of meaning and purpose. And so next life hack is do stuff that's good and not just useful. And when we think about the virus and we think about the present situation, we're in a place that is really unique. We're in a place that is unprecedented in the challenge and opportunity. How do we do stuff that's good? How do we be a person that is morally upright, that's doing things that we believe to be good, rather than just things that are useful? We all have to shower and to eat and to do all these and maybe to work, and that's great. But what about doing things that are good? So that's the end of our lecture part. The soul. There are parts of the soul that are satisfied with doing work that is good, with doing things that are morally upright. There's parts of us that are satisfied only when we do things that are a good story or experience beauty. And there's other parts that we need to live according to the truth, and tell ourselves true things about ourselves and try to root out the lies. And especially with regard to stories that we tell ourselves and narratives that we live by. And so that's sort of the end of our lecture part. And so now we're going to go to the questions. And before we go on, there's a midstream survey. So make sure that you fill out the midstream survey. This does get you an entry into our drawing. Also, if you have any anonymous questions, please submit them to that particular link. It also should be in the video description, the description of this video below. And remember that it's for this giveaway. The giveaway is valued at about $200 worth of goods and things. Now, again, that's all dependent on how much one values a roll of toilet paper at, which the price and value of such is highly variable in this time. But nonetheless, you will be getting a roll of toilet paper if you win, in addition to these other things that are totally great. A book on anxiety, a Fitbit to keep you active, a journal to reflect on all of the things you've learned here and elsewhere, among other things, and an Amazon gift card because you're trapped at home. All right, here's how it's going to work. For the live drawing, it's a bit complicated in terms of the logistics, so I'm going to explain it a few times, and then we're going to go through it. First, you're going to finish your surveys. That includes the one that I just told you to fill out, the midstream, as well as the final one that I'll ask you to do at the very end of the Q&A. Next, my team behind the scenes is going to count the entries. There's going to be a certain number of entries, both from social media posting that you've done in the last week or two, as well as things that you've done, entries that you've done today. Then I'm going to pick a random number, and then we're going to give that number to our team, and they're going to match that to an entry number. And finally, we're going to be able to announce who the winners are. And then we'll be in touch with you to send you your gift box. All right. So without further ado, questions and answers. Again, sadly, it will just be me. You're stuck with me and not my beautiful wife. And I will go through the questions. Again, I'm David Carrion, and I'm going to be answering your questions. Make sure they're not clinical questions. Please direct any personal questions about your own mental health or physical health to your physician or mental health provider. Remember to be nice to each other in the chat. And that is the setup. So let's go to questions. All right. Question number 1. Oh, this is an easy one. Thank you guys for just giving me these softballs. How do you determine goodness? So, what a spectacular question. Now, the argument I was making in this setup is that goodness is something that's kind of like a primary sense. You can just see it if you look at it. And while I think that's partly true, I think that this is a sense that can be trained. There's definitely like direct perception. So similar to looking for something. You can have a part of it which is just raw and physiologic. So, for example, you have rods and cones. They pick up photons. You can see red or blue or green. But your ability to identify or to read, for example, that is culturally mediated. So you have to be taught what sorts of shapes correspond to what sorts of sounds. And you can get better and better at reading. And that is something that there's an input culturally. And so part of it is primary, and there's some really interesting work about the primary moral sense from, I think it's Paul Bloom at Yale. Just Babies, I think is the name of the book. But he's got some incredible work on how even like 9-month-olds are able to, even like pre-verbal babies are able to determine what situations are just or unjust, or fair or unfair, and even what punishments are just or unjust. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. But yeah, more or less, you take those. My view is you take those primary things and then you learn, and so the question is, under what setting do you learn? Who teaches you? Well, I mean, part of the answer is, well, you've already been taught a lot of what you know, but this gets into the question of ethics, or possibly religion or theology. What is the origin or source of morality? And then there's also questions of moral epistemology. How do we even know? And I think that's what the question is getting at. How do we even know what's right or wrong? And I think that gets to just spectacularly challenging questions on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I encourage you just to reflect on it. What exactly is the right thing to do in this particular setting? And I think there's cases that are easy for us, Hitler versus Martin Luther King, and then there's cases that might not be. If you're a healthcare worker, do you go to work and help strangers but put your family at risk? That's a challenge. That's a challenge to know that's a question. How do you prioritize the American dream versus self-sacrifice for others? And these are questions that I encourage you to explore in discussion and debate. I think that's the other way that we detect what's true, is by conversation. That maybe each of us can see a piece, but together in dialogue and debate, we can come to greater moral knowledge. Or for others, perhaps moral knowledge is something that is given from revelation, that perhaps it's a consultation of the Bible or Quran. So that's how I would answer that softball of a question to get us to kick off the Q&A. All right. Number 2, can you go over some practical ways of finding a purpose? Oh, man, you guys I love these easy questions. There's a lot of ways to do it. And I think that this is, there's a number of approaches, but I think that trying to go off of what you've already experienced as meaningful or purposeful. What are moments in your life that you personally have had that sense? And let me take another step back and say, I think this is a question that is unique and specific to us as moderns, with most of our material needs met. It comes up a lot. If you're a subsistence farmer in most of history, the answer is don't starve, feed your family. That's your job. And so the question of what is my purpose is harder to detect. But finding one of these stories and exploring some of these stories, and some of this might be an academic exercise, as in reading stories. Who are people that inspire you? Think about that. Think about read stories that are inspiring and say, you know what, I'm really inspired by this person or that person or this way that things are done. maybe that's and doesn't even have to be a real person. It could also be a hero from fiction, and say those are characteristics that I really care about. And then look around you. What are some problems that you could solve? And you don't have to be huge. It might just be putting things in order in your own apartment. Like I've heard one psychologist controversially recommends clean your room. That's a great place to start. But that being symbolic of everything. Like find some problem that's near at hand and solve it. And you won't be done with that, because there's always a problem near at hand, whether it's your own problem, but ideally somebody else's problem. Do all your neighbors have groceries? Do all your friends are they all feeling socially connected? Are the problems in your community totally addressed? If not, pick something. Might even be at random, and start to work on it. So those are some ways. There's some more systematic ways, but I think that's one approach. What if you're depressed and nothing has significance? This is a really good question. And I think this is one of those areas that is where my perception analogy breaks down. Or at least maybe it works perfectly, but is instructive. So often in depression, everything that you do feels meaningless. That's often a experience that no matter how big the accomplishment, it might even feel less than that. It might just feel like I'm a terrible person and I just did a terrible thing, even though on any sort of objective measure it was a good thing. And so that feeling of accomplishment, of satisfaction, is drained. And I think that in that sense, this is where the other human capacities can come to play and can come to bear. It's almost like if a person is blind, needing to rely on other senses to figure out how to move forward. And I think for a person who's depressed, trying to find a purpose or significance, I think the first thing is to address the depression, and work with your doctor as best you can to treat that condition. But so long as it persists, doing things that other people say might be significant, doing things that would be purposeful on some sort of even academic level, even if they don't feel purposeful, is an important way forward. And also trying to get these pathways of, and again, starting small. Like it might be the significant thing for a person who's with, crippling depression might be going for a walk. That doing the small things that doctors or therapists are suggesting you do, that might go a very long way to helping address your depression itself. So it's a very difficult situation when the very things I'm saying for some people can help guide them are those senses are not working. All right, so I am going to move on to our next step. So next step is to finish your surveys. Okay, so now we're at we're close enough to the end that I want you to fill out this particular survey. So fill out the end survey. I'm going to keep answering questions. And I think that it's a spectacular time to fill out the survey, get your last entry in, and at 2:50 we'll cut it off, and then we'll go to the next step of the live drawing. Okay. Is it possible that those with a higher probability of suicide don't participate in religion because they feel shunned by their family or community's preferred religion, and this results in the disconnect? Yes. So there are so many moving pieces. Oh, here, I forgot to put this in. Here's the survey. So end of stream survey. There are so many moving pieces with suicide and with these bigger topics that it's a gigantic complex situation. And so I think that one thing that can make a person feel suicidal is exclusion from their group. So yes, definitely that the opposite thing might happen as well. Now, in this particular survey, they were able to account for that partly by having there be crossovers. So people who were in the group and stayed in the group, or things like that. But if, again, there's a lot of background that might have happened for people that were in or out of that particular study, where that's a valid group that's not being included. That some people are being excluded, and that's incredibly painful. And I think one question is, how does religion, or how can various religions draw people in a better way? And also, for people that are not included in a particular group, what kinds of groups can they find if this pathway that they grew up with is not an option? What are the remaining options? What are other ways that people can feel that sense of connection? So in the other survey that I had linked, it was sports. That particular activity, as much as I am no sportsman, it was the community and connection of a sporting team that seemed to have even stronger connections in improved self-esteem and improved connection than some of those other categories. So it's a spectacular question. All right, next we're going to move on to the next thing. We're going to start to, so now that you've submitted your entries, we're going to count the entries. So start counting, team, and then we're going to go from there. The next question is, do you think that folks who always give and try to do good have a higher risk of being wounded emotionally if their good isn't recognized or acknowledged? Now, okay, this is another great question. All these are great questions. You guys are just, super easy questions. So there are, so there's a challenge when doing good. And there's a variety of motivations for doing good. And I think that there's one idea that we do good to bond together with another person. That if I do good for you and you do good for me, that we are closer. But oftentimes, and this is a classical pattern in especially close relationships, one person feels they're doing more than the other person. I think a comical study is, if you ask a married couple, what percentage of work of the household duties or total work do you think you're doing? The sum is, if you add up what the husband thinks he's doing and the wife thinks she's doing, the answer always adds up to more than 100%. In other words, they both think they're doing more than 50%. So this is a common challenge, and again, resentment can build up. But I think that's a related problem that can corrupt a perfectly good deed. Now, a perfectly good deed, in this sense, is something that wouldn't require any praise. A perfectly good deed is something that would be done for its own sake, for the sake of the other. And I think that it's really difficult to do a perfectly good deed because we always want to be recognized or praised or thanked for the work we do. But the resentment that could build when we aren't appreciated also helps us to recognize that perhaps the deed that we were doing wasn't simply for the other person. Partly it was for ourselves. And in some sense, that's totally excusable and inescapable. Of course, we are imperfect people, and of course, our motivations are mixed. But it does help us reflect, and it's a moment to reflect. And perhaps we're not at the saintly level to even be able to approach these good deeds in a way that we can go without the praise. But and if that's the case, then it's often a good idea to practice that. In other words, do some small amount of actions where you know for sure nobody's going to find out and you can't get praised, and sort of work on that aspect. All right. So the next part of this drawing is we are going to be doing some randomization. All right, everybody, are you happy about randomization? We're going to pick a random number. Now, I don't actually have one of these devices, so I'm going to have to trust that Google is reliable in giving me a random number. So we have a total of 380 entries, and so Google here is going to we're gonna roll the dice 5 times. Everybody ready? Here is 1. Here is 2. Here is 3. Here is 4. And here is the actual number that's going to win, 5. Okay, lucky number 199. You are the winner. Now, nobody knows what their number is yet, so we're going to map this onto an actual person shortly. And winner number 2 is going to be spin number 1, spin number 2, spin number 3, spin number 4, and spin number 5. Lucky number 177. Lucky number 177. So we are going to proceed with the next set of our slides and such. Okay, so we're going to map that onto a person shortly. So I'm going to announce a few new exciting things. Exciting thing number 1, we've had such a positive response to this and such a positive experience, we are going to keep doing it. I'm going to be launching a live stream called Carry On. A psychiatrist explores life, the universe, and everything. So I'm going to be having guests, I'm going to be doing more lectures, I'm going to be doing Q&A, all the fun stuff that you've known before. So please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I decided to pick prime time because, hey, I can pick whatever time I want because it's the internet these days. So Tuesday, 8 to 9 p.m., starting on 4/28. So not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday at 8 o'clock, I will be on the interweb live. So please join me. The other exciting thing is that because of your great response, our team at Flourish Tech has been deciding that we're going to do small groups. So there's been an overwhelming response to our questions and surveys. Based on your feedback, we're going to be developing a system for helping to build community. So we've actually selected a few people from the audience and from these surveys to run our pilot group. The pilot group starts at 3:20 p.m. So for those who have been selected, please hop on the link that you were provided at 3:20 p.m. For everybody else, we'll be in touch about other options if we continue along this pathway later. All right, now for the moment you've all been waiting for. We are going to announce a winner. Okay, so is everybody ready? Drum roll. And the winner is at ivy.so and at otherwayw. Congratulations! We will be sending you the stuff. We'll be sending you the stuff shortly. So, thank you, everybody. This has been a spectacular experience. Thank you for being a part of it. I really appreciate all of the participation, the surveys you filled out, the chats you've done. It's been fun, and so I do wish you the best in the midst of this time, in the midst of this crisis, and thank you for being a part of mental health in the time of coronavirus. So I will be. So once again, I'm going to remind you, if you've been selected for the Flourish Tech small group, please log in at 3:20 p.m. And otherwise, we're going to go from there. So again, please keep track of us on all of the social medias. Please Instagram, Facebook, Twitter us, TikTok, LinkedIn, etc. So thank you so much, and I wish you well in this time.